any questions that they would like to ask. The first hand up at the back there.
Hi, this is a question to you all really. Your products look very interesting, but of course we need to know if they're really working to make people more healthy. What kind of research do you think needs to be done?
You want to start at the bottom and move up? You're allowed to pass if you want.
We have some figures on reduction on absence from schools, but generally it's very, as I mentioned this morning, because you need clean water and hand washing and toilets, and depending on the outbreaks of these diseases are intermittent, it's very difficult to get a really good to get a good study. Various studies have been done, and some are, unless you put all three together, and also it's disastrous to try and do a placebo because people find out that the water doesn't look as good. So the answer is we have relied on we have figures on acceptance. Acceptance is very high. When people get it, they use it. If you ask them if it makes them better, they all say it's better, but to what extent it's the placebo and they're exaggerating, at that point you've no way of finding out. I don't know if David wants to add anything. No. It's difficult. I mean, just one thing. If you divide a village in two and give one person the intervention, the other person not the intervention, the ones with the intervention will downplay if they were ill because I think it's their fault. And the ones without the intervention double the times they were ill in the questionnaire because they think they'll get it next if they exaggerate their illness. So that doesn't work. There's another one tried it with making a filter not working, another person making filters. But the trouble is the dirt that gathered in the filter started making it work. So all the attempts I know that have tried to do a double-blind test or anything like that just haven't worked.
For the Water Shop project, we're setting up a baseline study. And so in the coming years, the outcome of these studies will be publicized. Simple.
Alison?
I guess I wasn't particularly talking about a particular technology, but I think as well as looking at the sort of the technological side of things, the health and seeing the health benefits, does it treat water better? Does it pump water better? It's got to be used by people, so it's got to be affordable, it's got to be accepted by the community, it's got to be accepted by the regulator, because if it isn't being used, it's not providing anyone with any health benefit. And those are very complex research questions to answer, but not impossible.
To answer the question honestly, we're not trying to measure the health benefit because it's a terribly complex question. And furthermore, we regard the challenge of sanitation being much broader than just disease. And I omitted to mention that included in the digestion process is food waste and animal manures in the same digester. So we see ourselves as trying to take a holistic approach. However, monitoring our projects is very important to us, and that will be revolving around user, how comfortable people are to use it, and so on and so forth, and hopefully the promulgation of the schemes.
So on our side, when you look at the way that the WASH group in the foundation is broken down, there's the technologies, which is what I deal with. You've got the market folks, the urban sanitation market folks. You've got the building demand at scale, which is the change behavior, and how do you now access, how do you scale up to 2.4 billion people, policy and advocacy and MLE. One of the things that we recognize is that we're not the smartest people in the room. Our goal is to try and find the smart people in the room. So we're looking at the health metrics and how we do that, and we're effectively outsourcing that to our EDD, our enteric diseases group, and into our family planning group. They have a platform which is EMA 2020, I think, that comes, I'm trying to think of where it is, I think it's through Emory University. But this is the driver behind the model cities. So if you can take some cities that are at, there's several criteria you got to have. One is that they're wanting to actually improve their sanitation, because you can't force anything in there. Then you can start building those baseline studies out as you start to develop the technologies to bring in. And that allows you to start using the health metrics that are defined by the people much smarter than we are in WASH about health metrics. So that's effectively one of the drivers behind the model citic side. Sorry, do you want to still?
Yeah, it's probably a question for all of you. Could you tell us more about lifespan of your products and maintenance as well?
Do you want to start on this and go down?
Sure. Obviously early days. We expect a life cycle in excess of 10 years for the fabric. The fabric itself has been used in the tropical water applications for 30 years, with the lifetimes of 30 years. Operation and maintenance, clearly, again, difficult to be categoric, but minimal, and certainly within the capability of local facilities. Essentially, once the material is in the bag, nature does the rest. They just have to stir it a bit, and then task done, because we're relying on nature to provide the heat. There is no control systems, there's no power production, there's no pumps in our arrangements, no electrically powered devices. So the answer is we try to get it right down to the bare minimum so that it does last and it does keep going.
Probably not relevant.
Okay, for the rainwater harvesting and the water purification, it's about 10 years at least. That's the guarantee given. For the water shop, it's the operations and maintenance that's done locally. And because money is involved, that people are being paid for taking care of operations, it can go on for, well, many years without any problems.
I think there's, as we mentioned, we started 6 years ago, and some of the early ones are still running without spare parts. They do depend on somebody turning 2 taps to periodically back flush, and if they don't do it, it gets harder and harder to pump. So some have given up the ghost because of that, but we haven't had any come to the end of their what I call the natural life. Beyond that, who knows? We have to keep waiting. Thank you.
And then from our position, I mean, I come from it differently because I'm on the portfolio management side of things, and we look at everything from how do you improve composting to these very complex systems. I'm trying to be a little provocative by putting the more complex ones up there. But this is where the field testing comes in. I mean, this is product development. And that again comes to the fact you can't rush these things. So part of, you can run defeamers on the designs and all the, whether it's just a simple composting solution, you can run a defeamer on it and predict what you're going to see. But until you get out into the field, you're not going to understand when your mean time to failure is. And that's really what is going to drive towards the maintenance schedules. And it's going to drive toward, again, I'm talking all ranges of technologies, even, dug pits. When does the wall fall in, right? So it's vital that technologies get out of a lab environment and they get into an operating environment. But what's also vital that something I feel strongly about is expectation management. So when you take a technology out there, and this happens at the foundation, I mean, it's a terrible thing at the foundation sometimes. They love it, they want to put it out there, they want to splash it all over the papers, and you're like, we're putting it out there to try and break it, because we want to break it so we know how to fix it to make it better. And it may be 3 or 4 model cycles down the road before we truly understand what the lifetime is. So there's a lot of expectation management that has to go into when you put something out in the field. You can't just put it there and assume that it's suddenly going to become a product or suddenly going to become usable for what you predict the lifetime to be. So I know I'm not giving you an answer on that. What I would do is I would, if there's a particular one that you want to talk about, I would direct you to the person that's actually doing it. But that's the philosophy that we take within the portfolio. Mary, did you have a question? Yeah, I'm just looking for other hands. Yeah. Oh, it's very gracious of you. Yeah.
Just from the healthcare side, if you're looking at something like antibiotic resistance, you find the solution, you worry about the price after, even though everyone's after that kind of cheap magic bullet. But I was wondering, to the panelists, but also to the wider audience, what's most important, the cost or the result in terms of the technology?
Who wants to start? Alison, you start on that because you did the toolkit for.
Yes.
Oh, I think it's a sort of impossible. Yeah, thanks. I think it's an impossible balance, because if it's too expensive, then people won't buy it. But any penny that's spent on something that's not working is completely wasted. So that's a real cop-out answer, but I don't think I don't think there is an answer.
Maybe the follow-up in terms of funding or support to an idea doesn't follow the same
I mean, I'm definitely not an epidemiologist, but I think you can, if you're testing a drug, for example, you can do a kind of clinical trial and get quite a clear answer, whereas in the water and sanitation sector, you can test the filter and prove that it reduces viruses by 99.99 whatever %, but there's a whole extra element of are people using it, are they maintaining it on top of that? So it's not an easy answer to say yes, this works and this doesn't, and it's so context dependent as well.
Can I? So I'd flip that a little bit, and I'd say, you know, this is why you see people going for smallpox eradication and polio eradication, because there's this cost to constant treatment of the disease. And that is why I think that the wash sector has actually been smarter about it, that they understand that to solve the problem, there has to be a sustainable component to it. Now, I'm not saying, you know, the challenge really for the vaccination sector is you know, how do you make that financially sustainable or give that a value? And that's the tougher call, right? But from the wash side of things, there is an intrinsic value to waste. I think that all of us up here would totally agree with that. And if you can access that intrinsic value, then you can start to drive towards a sustainable solution. And really, I think a couple of people up here said exactly the same thing. The challenge is not the technology. I'll be honest, we've got the technology. The challenge is the business model. That's why I'm happy I'm not doing that bit. You know, I deal with the technology, that's easy. It's the business model, and it's the business model that's going to solve the problem. So. Oh, Virginia, and then at the back and there, and we have like 3 minutes left, so we'll pick one person to answer it. No, go ahead, Virginia, and then.
Okay, really quickly. I'm interested in all of your different kind of product journeys, how you've come across with and interacted with different types of product standards with relation to the delivery that you are bringing into the world, especially when it comes to water treatment and insurance that you are removing pathogens, and how that plays into your.
I'm going to ask you to answer that in 20 seconds each, and if you can't, that's a coffee break conversation. So
It has to do with rapid prototyping. So you start with the prototype 0, you test, you find what the results are, and based on that, you assess what the market is, what market needs are, and based on that, you do a second prototype. So it's rapid prototyping. Go into the fields, get it tested, try to break it, make a new one better, and so on.
anyone else?
I'm sorry, what was the question about adherence
The product
to
development
international
process.
standards?
Well, I was actually interested in like standards in terms of like how you benchmark successful water filtration or
Okay,
treatment.
well, when I last looked at it, there wasn't a world standard. There's WHO guidelines, but most people go to the American EPA standards, which are, there's so many logs. There were about 7 logs for bacteria, 4 logs for viruses. And that's what most people publicise and adhere to. And it's the basis of other standards pretty well. Am I right?
It's some of them, yeah. Do you want to answer
I'd
that?
go with the same, with
Right.
the first answer, lots of prototyping. In the case of sanitation, you're looking at lots of different sorts of standards to apply for, because you've got the obviously pathogen transmittal is the key one. But clearly sustainability and use of products is a separate issue altogether. So it's a mixed answer.
And real quickly, we've got a program that's, we're putting a bunch of money into creating an ISO standard for toilet systems. Based, not based on the system itself, but based on the output criteria. So I want to skip to the young lady at the back that's been very patient. We've got 1 minute. We might be able to go over because we are cutting our time short for Marianne. So.
My name is Wade Amosan, and I'm just thinking about some of these equipment for emergencies, because we use a lot of similar things in emergencies, and linking that to cost, because for emergencies you want to go for what's not too expensive, and you also want to go for what's effective, and you want to reach as many people as possible in that time space as well. So I think cost is very important.
it depends how much water you need. And based on that, you can scale the system to such a dimension that it provides you sufficient water during the dry period.
When there's no rain?
So during the dry period, you just take the water from the tanks. And suppose you have a gigantic roof, you can collect like 1 million liters of 1 million cubic meters of water. So it just depends on your need and the ground space of how do you call it, roof available.
So I'm going to close down there, try and give you some time back. We didn't give you as much as we could, but we tried. And thank the panelists for the presentations, and thank you all for your questions. Appreciate it.